we're doing, if you spend money overseas and you subsidize the military-industrial complex, and they're building a lot of weapons for other people, our wealth is drained out. Then if we do to our country, which Bill was describing here shortly about how you disinvite people to come to your state because of taxes and regulations and permits and all this, we've done this nationally as well. We have uninvited some of our business interests, and they have found out because high taxes and regulations of bad monetary system, people have left. The businesses, they're in the business of making a living, and they have an obligation to their stockholders, and therefore they leave the country. But that is a result of bad policy. But this is the kind of thing I think the current generation as well as the young generation has to know and understand, because we cannot continue to do what we're doing. It has to end. It has to be reformed. And we have two choices. We reform it in a way of doing it, or we move in the wrong direction in saying, you know, what we need is more government. And so far, we're tending to do that in Washington. You know, we came across this economic crisis, which was predictable. Quite frankly, I think it was a consequence of too much spending, too much borrowing, too much taxes, too much regulation, and too much printing of money. So we get into the crisis, which was predictable. The bubble burst, and everybody panics, and in 08, they say, we have to bail out everybody, or we will have a depression. So what was how are they going to solve this problem? Well, we need to raise the taxes, we need to spend more money, we need to borrow more money, we need to write more regulations, and we need to print a lot more money. And then they wonder why it's not working. So those ideas aren't complicated. And I think the young people can understand this as well as some others. And I think maybe their minds aren't muddied up at times, and they say, you know, this is logical. Why would it be that just printing money would create wealth? But it doesn't create wealth, it distorts things. So the younger generation, I have found, and met so many, that are very energized and are willing to study. And I tell them quite frankly that when I was in high school, when I was 16, or when I was in college, I didn't think hardly anything about politics at all. It's necessary now. It's out of self-interest, your personal self-interest, your family self-interest, your community, your states, and for our country. And that is to understand the problems and understand what the solutions are. Sometimes I simplify it by saying that, you know, we got in this trouble because we didn't follow the Constitution. Why don't we try just following the Constitution for a change?
Yeah!
Tonight, because this is a memorial dinner for our veterans, and this is very important. The speaker mentioned that I've been in the service. A lot of times I go with my veteran groups throughout my district. And one of the things that we've done a lot in my district, as a matter of fact, we have a real strong reputation for it. Many of us have been called, and we went and served in World War I and Korea and Vietnam, and they come back and they've never been recognized and never been honored, and yet they have earned a lot of medals and recognition. And we will go to bat for them, because a lot of times it's just the family, not the veteran himself, but it will be the family who would say, we'd like to know what he did and what happened. And we go to bat for them, and we get a lot of these recognitions, and we have meetings, and then we talk about it. And when I meet with the veterans, I generally say, you know, everybody knows I'm a veteran, and I will sort of, with tongue-in-cheek, brag and say, you know, I was a volunteer, and I volunteered, and I ended up staying in the Air Force for 5 years. But then I tell them, well, the real truth is that as a resident, I was a resident in Detroit, Michigan. I was studying internal medicine. I had been out of medical school for 2 years, and I got a notice in the mail. It was in October, November, I guess, of '62. Anybody remember what happened in October of '62? And there was a little problem down there in the Caribbean, and therefore they called on me. Now, I was out of the immediate age group of the draft. There was still a draft going on, and the call came, and as a physician, though, you know, things, at times, everybody's equal, except for some people are more equal or less equal than others. Well, doctors were less equal than others, so I was I was subjected to the draft at an older age. I forget what age I was, but 27 or something like that, not 21. But I had a medical degree, so they needed a doctor. So I got my notice, and it says, you're drafted as a buck private in the Army, and you have to go unless you want to volunteer. If you volunteer, we're going to make you a captain and we'll allow you to practice medicine. I said, I immediately volunteered. But it greatly disturbed my life because it interrupted my medical career and my medical training. But I went and made the best of it and assumed the responsibility that so many of us in this room have in the past. And I actually stayed in a little longer on active duty and then stayed in the Air National Guard. Now, I became a flight surgeon, which means I don't do surgery in the air. What I do is I have the responsibility of taking care of the medical problems of pilots. But during that time, I also learned how to fly, got a pilot's license. But my duty was to travel, and it was sort of like being an occupational physician to look at the stresses of life of pilots. And I would do a lot of flying, but back then there weren't too many jets. Sometimes when we'd go overseas, we flew on these prop planes that would fly about 12,000 feet maximum when you go through France, crossing the Atlantic very slowly and hop, skipping across. So they were long, long trips. But I did it. That was part of the duty. And also I wanted to see the world. But the most impressive trip, now that I look back, happened to be a trip that we made through the Mediterranean, stopping in Spain and Italy, all the places we have bases, Turkey and Ethiopia, and then we went over into, matter of fact, in Pakistan and into Iran. But when we were in Pakistan, the local military officials there said, well, while you're here, we have time, we want to drive you up to the Khyber Pass. And believe me, if you visualize that, and maybe somebody here that's been over there in the military would, but it is very impressive. If you think that they can show where the boundary is out there between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there is no way. And I remember driving up there, and one of the senior officers said, he said, see those mountains up there? They look like they were quiet as Mike's up there. He says, there are many, many tribes up there. And he says, they're very, very independent. And all the nations in the world have come here and tried to conquer them, and they've never been conquered. Right. And I remember that so clearly, and then I think about what's going on, with our troops and all over there. So, but I do want to remark a little bit about the foreign policy and the obligation of our military personnel, because obviously many volunteer. We take very seriously our appointment to the military academies, and I think that's very important. But it also means that a lot of people have volunteered, a lot of people have been drafted, and many of us fulfilled that duty and did our very best. I tell the military people in my district that at that time I felt very obligated, to do my very best, and I wasn't one that challenged things at that time. But being in Congress and being on the Foreign Affairs Committee and dealing with the very issue of granting authority, I had a different responsibility. I was supposed to represent the people and make decisions. One thing I've come to a conclusion on is that the Constitution for which we fight and die for to save is very important. So we can't go into war carelessly. Think about how we started to go into war after World War II. Up until World War II, we didn't go to war unless we declared it. But once the United Nations came into effect, the first thing that did show a few years later, we were in war in Korea without a declaration of war and essentially without permission of the Congress. I don't think this country should go to war under a UN banner. It should only be done at the direction of the U.S. Congress. Less problems. If there was an outright declaration of war, you know who the enemy is and you know what you have to do. Just think, it was a little over 3 years World War II was won. Now we've been in war in Afghanistan for 10 years and it's spreading. I'm concerned that it's going to spread into Pakistan. We're already bombing Pakistan. And the irony of our foreign policy should be very clear that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I used to sort of kid at the fact that I said, you know, our foreign policy, you only have two choices. We go to a country and we tell them what to do. If they do what we do, we give them a lot of money. If they don't do what we want them to do, we start bombing them. And I would think, well, why shouldn't there be another option? Why don't we do neither and talk to and work with them and make them our friends and allies and trading partners or something like that? But I said we should do neither, instead of one or the other, but we're doing both to Pakistan. We're at this very time today, we lobbed the bomb in there, 4 civilians were killed. We don't know whether they were really the bad guys, the good guys, but we make enemies by doing that. What would we do if another country did that to us? Right. I mean, at the same time, we send them a lot of dollars. Then the big question is why didn't they help us? Should they have helped us? And what were they hiding? And we own them, so why haven't they done it? So, you know, it is a foreign policy that to me is not constitutional. It dilutes and it distracts from a strong national defense. It costs us a lot of money, and it tends to make a lot of enemies by doing that. I have sort of a foreign policy golden rule. And when I look at what we're doing, I want to ask, what if another country did that to us, and how would we react? And we would resent it. Let me tell you, just think of how we came together on 9/11, and properly so. But if anybody touched us, like we just casually go in and occupy these countries, right now, our arch enemy, the people who are out to kill us, are called the Taliban. And we're losing lives on a steady basis. We've lost close to 6,000 lives in fighting these wars over there. But the Taliban is made up of the Mujahideen, with whom we worked with when we were trying to chase the Russians out of Afghanistan. Right. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. And yet the Taliban, their main goal is not like Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda are the ones who are willing to commit suicide and come over here and do us harm. They are much more angry and dedicated and radical and very dangerous. But the Mujahideen and the Taliban are people who are saying, our main goal is to get rid of foreign occupiers, just as we would do it. And this is sometimes annoys a lot of people when I say this, but less so now than it was a few years ago, because the American people are getting tired of this. We're flat out broken. We don't need to be spending these hundreds of billions of dollars in 130 countries and having 800 military bases around the world. We don't need to participate in what Ronald Reagan warned us about. The empire, the prosperous country will collapse if you don't stay on the gold standard and you pursue a foreign policy like this, and we ought to prevent it. It really isn't all that difficult. And like I said, you know, we have a rule book, and any young people that come to my office, which they do frequently, I try very hard to hand them a copy of the Constitution, and I sign it. And it's really, you know, it's a very small little booklet, which is pretty amazing that that's the basic law of the land. And it's not complicated. My wife keeps saying, why do you guys up there write all that legislation? It's 1,000 pages, nobody reads it, nobody can understand it. She says, why don't you write it in plain language like the Constitution? But they come in and I sign it, and I said that I'd like you to read this, because I can't get anybody else to read it around this place. But the young people are reading it. The young people who come to my office, they will have their book. Matter of fact, there's been a couple of young new members to the Congress. One individual shortly after the election came running up to me in the hallway. He says, Dr. Paul, and he pulled out his Constitution, and it was really well worn and well read. It was one that I signed for him about 4 years ago. So, you know, it really made me feel good that he's in the Congress now and fighting these battles. So there is a transition going on, and it's a healthy transition. But just as the speaker mentioned, he has a lot of jobs to do, and he's had some help, but he needs some more help. What you need up here is probably a new governor to help you out a bit. So in the short run, I'm pessimistic. We have a tough job. cutting, and even for the new members and all, and this big argument of raising the debt limit, at the end of the world will come if you don't raise the debt limit, and on and on. You cut anything, and now some of the members are getting really angry people coming, don't cut what I want, what the things that I want. It's going to get nasty before it's all over. And my main goal has always been to try to prevent it from getting worse and improve it. But instead, right now, what is happening, because the bailout and the inflation by the Federal Reserve has created a pending crisis. There's impending in that the prices are starting to go up. And they call that inflation. Inflation has already happened. That's the printing of the money. The consequence of inflation is higher prices, and that is what's happening. Prices are going up. Yesterday and today, the statistics on price increases are significant. I'm predicting that next year is going to be much more significant. There's going to be a lot, and that's going to be a big issue. And that is the reason why understanding the Federal Reserve and what inflation is all about and why we need sound economic policy can be, and most likely, the biggest issue. And there's no reason that can't be tied in to a sensible foreign policy, because in a way, it should be easier to cut some of this foreign expenditure than it is to cut child health care. See, that doesn't make any sense, even though technically we probably should have never gotten into it, but that's not the place to go. What we should do is cut where we can come together. But I can get coalitions on this, but I can get it from the left, the moderates, and the independents. And sometimes it's tough getting other Republicans to say, because some of our proposals down there have been increasing this military-industrial complex expenditure, and I don't see how we can continue to do that. But I am very pleased to tell you that on the long term, things are going to get better. And I think it's the younger generation that gives me encouragement and enthusiastic. So we can solve our problems. If we do the right things, it would be difficult. I mean, if a country goes bankrupt, you can take care of that in a year or two. But you have to preserve freedom. The freedom to work hard and keep what you earn, protect civil liberties, get a sensible foreign policy. It might take a year or so, but we would get back on our feet. I mean, just think if we didn't have to pay these ornery income taxes and all the other things that we do, and we didn't have any inflation, we got rid of all these regulations, businesses would come back in. It wouldn't take that long. But at the rate we're going now, I would expect that we're going to have a bigger crisis, and it's coming, and it's dangerous. So it is vital. It is in our self-interest to know and understand these things. It's important for you as activists. Most people aren't activists. Most people vote, and I'm sure because you're an activist, people will come to you the day before the election and say, hey, who's on the ballot? What should I do? So you have a very important role to play. If you believe what I'm talking about, you have even more responsibility because you have a moral obligation. Some who don't care and don't understand, they will always be the majority. The important group is that small minority that has an understanding and has a philosophic commitment. So once you get that, you should always feel uncomfortable if you're not doing your very best to change it. And that number is growing. And I know you've been involved in this so long already, but we have to do our very best because our government will reflect the attitudes of the people, the philosophy of the people. If they want Keynesian, welfare, socialistic economics, which both parties have endorsed for so long, we're going to continue with this mess. But if the people decide we want our freedom, we want sound money, we want self-reliance and responsibility for ourselves, if the majority of the people see that it's in their best interest, that's the type of government we will have. So government, as frustrating as it may be, government really reflects the philosophic attitudes and the consensus of the people. So it's an educational job, but it's also a political job. Because you can read and study sound economic policy, but it's going to take people like us to implement those sound policy. In that regard, I think we have the most powerful message in the world. And the message is that if you care about your fellow man, if you care about humanitarianism, and you care about wealth and peace, then you accept these policies, because these are the policies that will lead to this. And we should not be batted down so often by the left and the socialists who say, yes, we don't care about people. Well, how can they care about people if they deliver the kind of prices that we have? And you know what? I don't really challenge them in their motivations. I think that most of them I meet are motivated, and they really believe that this is the only way you can have fairness and justice is by use of force to redistribute wealth, and believing that a central economic planner at the Federal Reserve can take care of it. They believe this because they've been taught this. But we need to convince them that if you care about the quality of life and the prosperity of our country and the opportunities with individual liberty, then you have to go with this philosophy. And the best way to do that is to continue your work in the Republican Party and continue to work to send us the best people you can. Thank you very much.